Hey there everyone, AJ back again for the Mighty Gluestick channel. I make videos about Dungeons and Dragons lore full-time thanks to your generous support, shares and views, with multiple uploads every week to help share the rich history of monsters, locations and mythologies of D&D. Mythologies. The Cyclops. Classic Greek myth and legend monster that is instantly recognizable to the vast majority of us, particularly those who have read the Odyssey. In Dungeons and Dragons, it was one of the first monsters introduced in the earliest edition of the game in Dungeons and Dragons White Box set, published in 1974. The greater Cyclops, enormous 40-foot tall giants, and the much smaller 7'6" lesser Cyclops appeared in the original Deities and Demigods Cyclopedia, published in 1980. The Cyclops Skin later appeared in the Monster Manual 2 in 1983, and there is an excellent monster ecology of the Cyclops Skin in Dragon Magazine number 254 by Jonathan M. Richards, which I'll be referring to extensively in this video. Published in December of 1998. Most players will be more familiar with the different version of the Cyclops found in 3.5 edition D&D, with the Shining South supplement published for Forgotten Realms, including the playable race called the Cyclopeans, which was also featured in Dragon number 323. I'll be referring to them slightly as well, in an article by Eric Cagle. 4th edition included Cyclops as servants of the dreaded Fey Giants, the Fomorians, and the Cyclops appears of course in the core monster manual for 5th edition. So, there are many versions of the same general monster, and in some ways you have to pick and choose based on what edition you're playing, or just what you think a Cyclops should be, because you will find resources for exactly what you're looking for, more likely than not. But we are looking for mainly lore that fits the current edition of the game, and also the latest additions to this game. Additions, I should say, not editions. At the time of the video being produced, we have just recently seen the release of Guildmaster's Guide to Ravnica, where there are certainly some very well-known Cyclops, one in particular I'll be talking about briefly later. So, there are not one, but at least two types of one-eyed giants, as well as some crossbreeds that are sometimes found among orcs and ettins. True Cyclops are huge humanoids, which means they stand between 16 and 32 feet tall. Actually, they sit right in the middle at between 20 and 24 feet tall, with a solid build and strength comparable to a stone giant, well, 1 point shy of being equal strictly according to the monster manual. They are much more brutal and clumsy though, with a renowned lack of skill when it comes to tracking, hunting and concealing their own tracks or presence. The true history of the Cyclops is lost in the mists of time, but the giants believe they are giant kin, born of Othea and some other primordial father, not true children of Anam, their own all-father, thus not true giants. Still, Cyclops do occupy a low rank in the ordning, typically just a smidge below the rank of a hill giant, still a little higher than the wretched and evil Fomorians. Some seem to think that the Cyclops also have a Fey origin, like the Fomorians, but this is just a case of them being confused, as is often the case with their much smaller cousins, the Cyclops Skin. As giants, they are tremendously strong, but they are not typically good at throwing boulders like their kin, so they only do that if they really can't reach the enemies with melee attacks. In combat, they tend to rush into their 10-foot reach zone and lay into their target with their favourite weapon, the Great Club, which is really just a tree trunk with some sharp rock shards shoved into it and strapped firmly in place with uncured animal hides. They will wear cured fur pelts if they can find them, but otherwise clad themselves in the stinking pelts that are stripped off animals they kill, not even waiting to cure them or dry them out, they just strap them on. So obviously they stink quite considerably. The Cyclops depicted in the Monster Manual for 5th edition seems to be particularly wealthy and well equipped, with boots that are probably fashioned for it by some slaves or very intimidated villagers somewhere. Cyclops are very tradition-bound creatures, and while few in number, they live in a culture that is the same as their Cyclops Skin cousins. So I'll talk about the Cyclops Skin, and you can apply these details to both races. Cyclops kin, I should say, stand just a smidge shy of the large size category, only really standing taller than 9 feet tall, but they are still massive compared to your average human, and still count as giants for the purpose of game mechanics, unlike the Goliath, who do not. This also means that they are supernaturally strong, able to lift and carry twice the amount their strength attribute normally represents. Though not represented in the 5th edition Monster Manual, they are similar to Goliath, and you could play one as a player character, but just adjust the attributes with a +2 to strength and +2 to constitution, and a -2 to dexterity and -1 to intelligence and wisdom. They are very powerful, but not smart, not agile, and they have a very simple, brutal outlook on life. All Cyclops are firm believers in luck, but they do not have any form of faith in anything else they can't see and touch. They have no religion. They have no gods of their own and don't care about the faiths and cultures of other creatures, not even other giants. Something is either lucky or unlucky, causing them to have good luck or bad luck. They never accept personal responsibility for their own good or bad fortune, and they will blame anyone weaker than them for their own misfortune, which will generally result in violence. If the person blamed is beaten severely, then they were the cause of the bad luck for sure. If they manage to avoid getting beaten up or actually win the fight, well, then they weren't the source of the bad luck. This is Cyclops' logic and belief perfectly encapsulated. They have no gods and no faith, so they have no shamans, witch doctors or soothsayers in their small tribes. They have no trust in any form of magic, and when they see something is magic or seems capable of using magic, they will single it out and get rid of it or kill it. If one humanoid in a group happens to look anything like they can cast spells or point a wand at them, they will attack that person and make sure that they are not going to cast any spells on them, typically by killing them, or at least ruining their hands and tearing out their tongue, or similar acts of precautionary mutilation. My advice is don't go wearing robes or fancy hats around Cyclops, and certainly never point a stick at them while speaking a language they don't understand. They all speak Giant, some speak Common fairly well, some also speak Orcish. They reside on the fringes of the most inhospitable places, either in remote mountains or islands, preferring to lair in caves, blocking off all but one entrance and sealing themselves in at night by rolling a massive stone or wooden barricade across it at night. They sleep in filthy piles of old skins and keep piles of gnawed bones that attract rats and vermin that they can also eat. They are not in any way fussy about their food or their appearance. They tend to have thick, greasy black hair when they're younger. It quickly balds though. They'll have a bald spot by the time they've reached adulthood. Males will typically be fully bald, and females may have a fringe of hair, but they actually prefer to lose their hair because it gets rid of the fleas and ticks that plague them. Having adapted to surviving on damn near anything edible that they can find, they'll keep livestock, usually sheep and goats, which they tend in whatever pastures they live near. They take them into the cave at night to keep them safe from predators, while the sheep are like an emergency meat reserve. They know how to raise them and use them for milk, and they don't make cheese from it unless they have some slaves that do that for them. It's just too complicated. Keeping slaves is typical for Cyclops, though it is obviously not mentioned at all in 5th edition Monster Manual, nor is there any mention of the absolute misogyny of their culture. Cyclops, and particularly Cyclops Skin, have a high birth rate and an equally high infant mortality rate, and they mature very quickly. At age 9, they are full adults, but the Cyclops only live about 55 if they are lucky. Males have a hierarchy based entirely on strength and toughness. The toughest bully is the tribe's leader, and also proclaims that any of the other best males in the tribe are his sons. As soon as another male manages to overpower and typically murder him, he becomes the leader and claims that all past glory and paternity are actually all his doing. This system ensures that most Cyclops males are eventually killed by either a predator such as tigers, wyverns, dragons, rocks, griffins, cave bears and the like, or killed by a rival male Cyclops. It's extremely rare for a Cyclops to die of old age. Females are above slaves in the social pecking order, and favoured female is determined by which of them can tell the best stories, which ensures that they do actually have a strong oral tradition and preserve some sense of their history, though there is a true account of events, which is secret lore of the females only, and the current version of the dominant male's history of events, which twists any facts to ensure it attributes all great deeds and good fortune to the current dominant males and his doing. This obviously changes quite a lot based on these frequent changes in leadership. Other than storytelling, females live miserable lives, constantly pregnant, and when they are no longer able to have children, they are exiled from the tribe. Humanoid slaves are less valued the more of them that the tribe has, but they are valued for the work that they can do, which would otherwise fall on the Cyclops to have to do. So out of sheer laziness, the slaves are actually quite useful. So the female Cyclops take most of the interest in feeding the slaves and making proper pens for them. The males and females both have a simple system for controlling the slaves, which is to beat them up, keep them hobbled together, punish attempts to escape by chopping off or smashing one of the slaves' feet, and just generally threatening and intimidating them on a day-to-day, hour-by-hour basis, until the slaves lose all hope of freedom. Weak and unruly slaves end up being eaten right in front of the other slaves. Most craft work is actually performed by females and slaves, though making spears and other weapons is not given over to slaves, obviously. Males fashion their own clubs and do not share them with each other, but spears and slings are considered communal property. The males typically think of their club as being lucky, or if it's unlucky, it's discarded. Cyclops Skin use clubs, but they also have the females chip stone into wickedly sharp axe heads and attach them to whittled poles to form crude bardich or long pole axes. They are terrible shots with their leathery slings, so compensate by loading handfuls of rocks into them to create a scattershot effect. This takes longer for them to load their slings than just a single bullet, but it's more effective considering they have terrible aim, striking a broader area and hopefully getting their target in the process. There is some lore about Cyclops called Mentor, being able to see the future and having a bunch of Cyclops Skin offspring which were more civilized in culture, called the Cyclopeans. They didn't have any penalty to their intelligence, but they also had no bonus to their constitution, and were still fairly clumsy. You might want to include them in some remote island chain, or have one of them encountered as it travels the world on a quest to find more of its kind, or some knowledge of their race's past. Typically, of all the Cyclops races, though, they are on the decline, being gradually whittled down in numbers, forced out of whatever meagre territory they have. Orcs tend to encroach on the mountain habitat of the Cyclops quite often, and where these creatures mingle, occasionally a crossbreeding will occur. Interestingly, it only seems to be orcs that can be a Cyclops offspring, and that includes Ettins. The result of such breeding will be a large orc with a single eye, considered blessed by their one-eyed god Grumsh. They will always become a shaman in their tribe, and they'll not survive past infancy in the Cyclops tribe, taking too long to grow and invariably being beat to death or suffering some fatal incident as they play with the more brutal and fast-growing Ettin siblings. Ettins will crossbreed to create Cyclopes, pretty much just like a typical Ettin but with one eye in each head. I mentioned that Cyclops do not have any reverence for gods. Well, there are exceptions. They tend to think of beholders as divine beings and refer to them as gods. The reason is easy enough to understand. The beholders are powerful, dominant, and have one large eye. They're actually considered to be fairly attractive by Cyclops standards. They also tend to accept the subservience of the Cyclops as worthy vassals who recognize their obvious superiority. Cyclops also keep gas spores as pets and simple, placid, and uncomplicated guards, tethered up at the entrance to their lair. They're quite fond of them. They are immune to the gas spores themselves, they're having very thick, leathery skin, and in a pinch can use the gas spores as a thrown explosive. They also have something of a fascination with ropers, but don't tend to think of them as superior beings, and do recognise the danger of ropers in their territory. So they'll attempt to drive ropers off with thrown stones and threats, rather than attack and kill them outright. That's about the full extent of their benevolent dealings with any other creatures. Other physical notes of interest, aside from their thick skin, which also affords them some protection against the cold of their mountain terrain, so they wander around largely unclothed and they never wear armour. They have two tear ducts and generally excellent vision in their single eye, the colour of which is often quite gorgeous, and it's said that no two Cyclops have exactly the same colours or patterns in their iris, the pupil of which is round. They have no sense of dark vision, and they do not tend to venture very far underground. Those Cyclops found in the Feywild version of the Underdark, which I call Feydark, may have limited dark vision. It is typical for them to serve Fomorian giants as masters. Of course, the Fomorians are very well versed in magic and quite often adapt simple magical items that they give to their Cyclops minions, typically in the form of magical axes and swords or spears. Cyclops respect strength and dominance, so sometimes they'll fall into serving powerful lords such as dragons and other evil giants, occasionally even drow. But the typical Cyclops is more of a chaotic neutral alignment. Left to their own devices, they're only really interested in survival, their own creature comforts, relief from boredom, and trying to improve their social standing without getting themselves killed. Notable Cyclops, well, not many, certainly not in Faerun, but Borborygmos is an enormous Cyclops from Ravnica. He is the largest and angriest of many large and angry Gruul clan leaders. Though he isn't the official master of the Gruul clans, when he gives orders he is so intimidating that the Gruul listen. Well, at least they used to. Borborygmos led the Burning Tree clan, which is the largest and most diverse of the Gruul clans, for decades. He commanded the respect and obedience of the Gruul by defeating all who challenged him. He embodied the raging fire that the Gruul believed burns in their bellies, and his wrath toward the civilization of Ravnica knew no bounds. He was quite terrible. With Nicobolas's urging, Planeswalker Domri Raid challenged and defeated the aging Borborygmos by sending wave after wave of ferocious beasts at him. Sounds like he's got my green deck. Borborygmos wasn't killed, but he lost the Gruul's respect, so he slunk away in defeat and misery, no doubt vowing revenge. He now lives as a trog in the rubble belt, somewhere beyond the 4th district, I'd imagine. Like, subscribe, check out my Patreon for some exclusive content and all of the full scripts for these videos, buy some merchandise, wear your geek with pride, check out Patron Blades for a mighty smooth shave, and as always, thanks for listening, and I'll be back with more for you very soon.